We gonna roll, we gonna roll, we gonna roll the union on. We gonna roll, we gonna roll, we gonna roll the union on. If the plan is in the way, we're gonna roll it over him, gonna roll it over him, gonna roll it over him. If the plan is in the way, we're gonna roll it over him, gonna roll the union on. We're gonna roll, we're gonna roll, we're gonna roll the union on. We're gonna roll, we're gonna roll, we're gonna roll the union on. If the boss is in the way, we're gonna roll it over him, gonna roll it over him, gonna roll it over him. If the boss is in the way, we're gonna roll it over him. Roll the union on. We're gonna roll, we're gonna roll.
Let's go.
We're gonna roll the union on.
How's everybody doing? These are the musical stylings of Mr. John L. Hancock's, a member of the Southern Tenant Farmers Union, the author of the famous Union ballad, Roll the Union On, which you're hearing now, and many, many other great things. How are y'all doing? I'm doing pretty damn good myself. It is looking more and more likely like the United Auto Workers Union is set to go on strike starting tonight at midnight. Who knows? Maybe last minute deal could be made, but from what I have been seeing, it seems more and more unlikely. Tonight at 10 Eastern, so 9 Central for y'all here in Texas, the UAW president, Shawn Fain, is going to be doing a live stream where I feel very confident saying it looks like there will be a call to go on strike. This is easily one of the most significant moments in labor history in this country, in my lifetime for sure, and I'm sure for a lot of the people out there listening today. We got some clips, some things to talk about. As always, folks, remember that these are more interactive streams than the main show. But I want to talk a little bit about the importance of the strike, some of the tactics, some of the things that we know, and also ways that you can find out to help out and support people. But I mean, where to start? Because we have a few things to get to, and don't worry, friends, we will go and take a visit to our friend Jim Cramer very soon. I do have to say that I feel like there should be, you know how they have like on Wall Street, they have the fear index, right? And it's a measure of, you know, what the of what the kind of confidence of Wall Street and investors are in the US economy, right? I think we should create one for labor, and we could call it the Cramer Index. Because the more unhinged and insane and irrational and angry that he's getting, it means that working people are getting more and more powerful. So I want to see that Cramer Index all the way. I don't think we've even reached the limits of the Jim Cramer Index, but we'll get to all that in due time. Maybe let's just fill some people in who have not been following the news. And again, just reminding folks, feel free to jump in, which has these are Q&As. I will open it up later to more off-topic questions, but at first, if you have something on the UAW, on the strike that you want to hear me respond to, put at Left Reckoning in the chat so I can see it, or better yet, send us a super chat, and I'll put those up. If they aren't related, I'll get to them later in the show. And thank you so much right there, Joshua, for the super chat here. But let's just get everybody started here, and I hope that this works, this format here. Let's just get everyone started. This was a video that was put out by the UAW last night that I think will sort of set the stage to get us talking about what's next. So here's Shawn Fain. He's going to be talking about what the tactics are here and the plan going into this potential strike that, again, might be going live this evening at midnight.
To the sit-down strike of the 1930s. We're calling it the stand-up strike. This is a strike that starts small and builds over time as more and more of us stand up and join the fight. This is a strike that keeps the companies guessing as to where and when the next local will walk out. And just as importantly, we are striking the big three, all three. We told them September 14th is a deadline, and we meant it. The big three have made $250 billion over the last 10 years. They made $21 billion in profits in the first half of this year alone. We will not stand by as corporate executives and the rich continue to make extraordinary profits while the rest of us continue to get left further and further behind. And I want to be clear, our goal is not to strike. Our goal is to bargain a fair contract. But if we have to strike to win economic and social justice, then we will shut down the big three. We are not afraid to fight for what we deserve. We will stand up for ourselves. We will stand up for our families. We will stand up for our communities. So UAW family, be ready. If your local is called to stand up, I know you'll meet the moment, just like the generations that came before us did.
So let's get into this a little bit. So again, like, come on, folks, like your heart needs to be beating. This is an important fight. And the thing about the UAW here is not only is it an important part of the U.S. economy, not only is this one of the most historic potential strikes that we have seen in our lifetime, one thing that has been so clear from the get-go, one of the reasons you should support strikes across the board, you should support union activity across the board. Not uncritically, right? As people who want to get the working class better, we can critique tactics and things like that. You know, the labor movement, that's what we support. What has been so encouraging about what Shawn Fain and the UAW leadership and the rank and file have been advocating for, have been messaging on, is that this is not just a fight for the UAW. This is a fight for the working class. These kind of wins are things that can move things for all of us, people in the union world and people who are also unorganized at the time. Because if you start getting these kind of concessions from these big three, man, we got to be getting those concessions for the rest of us. Things like cost of living adjustments, right? Having wages keep up with inflation. But, you know, I want to talk about wages, and I don't want to like undermine that. I hope that people are missing the point when I'm talking about wages. The wages are really important. Absolutely. But we, as people who want to see a strong labor movement, as people who want to see a different kind of labor movement, as people who want to see the rich and powerful quick, how do we open up the show this week on Left Reckoning? We played that clip of that fancy guy down in Australia who was complaining about how uppity workers are getting, how confident they are, and how they are not subservient to their bosses, and how they want to reclaim that power, that they want the government to create unemployment so that people like him can reap the benefits of that. Wages are only a part of the pie. And I think that Shawn Fain understands that. I think the UAW leadership is understanding that. And I think rank and file members are understanding that. And I'm hoping that our audience gets that and we can start to spread that message across the working class. The labor struggle is not just about wages. It is about upholding your own dignity as a human being, saying, you know what, I do not need to be forced to work 50 hours a week, let alone 40 hours a week, that I am more than just a laborer. I'm a member of my community, my church, my family, and I deserve to be able to spend time with the people that I love. This has been something that has been advocated for by Shawn Fain and the UAW. This is part of the plank here, talking about reductions in the working week. That's huge. That's massive. That's bringing us back. You know, people always talk about how we want the labor movement to go back to its more militant period in the early 20th century. I totally agree. But they forget what those demands were. They weren't just higher wages. And so much of the conversation about unions and labor in this country is almost exclusively on wages. Again, not undermining that, right? The amount of money you get paid is really damn important, especially when we're talking about companies like the big three auto companies. But we also need to be advocating for more time for people to be able to live, right? And not just in the sense of like, so we can go on vacation, to be able to express and experience our life as full human beings and not just appendages of the capitalist machine, of the boss's machine, right? We all deserve to have a fruitful and full life. This is the one that we got. And one of the arguments for being on the left, one of the arguments for being a socialist, one of the arguments for being an anti-capitalist is not just that, you know, the wages are too low. It's that we think that people deserve more than to spend their life laboring to make some other guy rich. That is like at the heart of all of this kind of politics. And to see a major labor union pushing for this kind of thing is really damn encouraging. There's also a lot of big pushes right now. And one thing that I've been happy to see with the UAW is a refusal to sort of sell out the part-time workers and these tiered contracts. And tiered contracts, you hear about them in every labor struggle. This is something that was developed to, frankly, divide the working class, and even more dastardly, the unionized working class, right? Because you had some people who are at a higher tier, their interests, they'll take a higher wage, and whatever happens to the other folks, whatever, right? It's trying to create different economic incentives so that you don't have this kind of unity. This is a tactic that is used all across the board under capitalism today and in the past. You use it in the two-tiered system to say, well, part-timers aren't the same as full-timers. They used it against workers in the South and all across this country on racial lines, right? White workers have different interests than black workers, right? White workers can get paid more. Who cares what's happening to these other kind of workers? These are all tools of the bosses to try to divide the working class, because what they're afraid of is moments like this when all those people are saying, we're holding the line together and we're going to get a better life together. That's the only way that these things are going to happen. So let's get into the tactics a little bit. Let me make sure I'm not missing anything in the chat either. But the tactic here is a unique one and an interesting one. And I've been talking to people throughout the day, trying to get a good sense of what the strategy is here. Just want to say really fast, so we're including the chat here. Lyrita, I apologize. I feel like I mess your name up every week. Apologies deeply. I like how Sean Fain used scripture to unify and mobilize people to fight for their neighbors. We're going to get to that in a second, because he has a bit in his most recent live stream that I really like on that. But what is the stand-up? What's the stand-up tactic? It's a little bit of a different one than what you might be expecting, that on Friday, all of the plants all across the country are going to shut down. The stand-up strike, is the idea behind it is that throughout the web of the big three auto companies, different facilities, different plants are going to be going on strike, not randomly, right? It's going to be strategized, organized, all that kind of stuff, but it'll be difficult for the bosses to be able to predict. So, a facility in Dallas could be shut down, or in Indiana, or in Michigan, right? They don't know which one is going to shut down, keeps them guessing. And the idea is to build it up as a leverage and negotiating tactic. So the idea is that instead of pushing the full-on button, right, of just complete shutdown from the get-go, by being able to utilize this, they can get more and more leverage as they are actively engaged in the negotiating process. Because remember, the end goal here is to see a strong contract for these workers. So the idea here is that being able to utilize ramp ups, or even ramp ups of different facilities across the country as a part of the negotiating tactic is something that they can use to sort of make these bosses see reason and see the light. I don't have all the economic statistics in front of me. You can look them up. Anytime you see Sean Fain talk, he will bring them up. These companies have made an incredible amount of money. And what have they been doing? They have been sending that money to the C-suite, the corporate office, right? The people at the top of the company, and to their shareholders, right? This is a part of financialization all across U.S. capitalism. Most of these companies, their first and foremost thought is, how do we keep the shareholders happy? Well, what they do is they pay them money. And that money is money that is being taken out of the pockets of working people. So what is going to need to happen in the leadership of these companies is a realization that they better keep their workers happy. And by being able to be strategic about where and when they are sort of making those companies feel pain, the idea is that they can bring them back to the negotiating table. Right now, I'm in full support mode. I'm not going to get into what my opinions are as a dude sitting here in Austin about what the best strategy is. I'm going to sit here and give out the argument so people understand what is going on, because this is something that you have to be supporting. This is something that is going to need not just the tenacity of the UAW, but hopefully the tenacity of the entire working class. This is a moment, if you are somebody who considers himself to be a socialist or a progressive, to start showing up, because so much of that movement has almost exclusively been leveraged at the behest of progressive presidential campaigns like Bernie Sanders' campaign or local campaigns. Not knocking that, not saying that's bad. But when people start talking about the working class, wanting to see working class power, they need to be the ones who are showing up and fighting and advocating and educating on these kind of things. So the stand-up strike is a different kind of tactic with the idea that they can ramp up pressure. And the way that it's sort of been explained to me by folks who know a little bit more about labor organizing than I do, is the idea here is that you give these companies an out, right? Because if you shut them down, you shut them down, right? That's the button that you've pressed, and that's sort of it until you back down. This allows these companies to maybe have a last chance to see reason. One thing that Shawn Fain talks about in all of his appearances is that September 14th is not a reference point, it is a deadline. And this is exactly, and these companies were treating September 14th as a reference point, right? Oh, well, they'll back down. They'll let us extend the negotiating process, et cetera, et cetera. It looks like the UAW is not going to let them do that, which is a good thing. This maybe lets those companies see reason and show up and give in. It's the easiest thing in the world for these companies to do right now. They have plenty of money, plenty of profits, plenty of protection from the people in government to allow these demands that the UAW is making to be heard and to be realized. I got a lot more to say. I want to make sure that I'm not just, this isn't a one-way conversation. So I'm going to check the chat again. Please put @LeftReckoning if you have a question or comment, so it's easier for me to see. We got more video to get to. We are going to get to everyone's boy, Jim Cramer, in just a second. But I would like to make sure that you guys are able to jump in if you have anything that you'd like to say. Doesn't look like it now, so maybe we'll get to that later. Let's start here, and then we can get to some more Fain posting. We are big fans of Shawn Fain here. This is a piece by Labor Notes. It's also in the show notes. This is something you should be checking out. If you are a member of the Democratic Socialists of America, and I know a lot of the chapters have been doing this work already, this isn't saying people aren't aware of these things, but if you are a member and you want to maybe think about ways that you can help out, this is something that you should be bringing to your chapter. This was written in Labor Notes, which again, this is a publication that you should be supporting all the time. This is right now is when you should be supporting Labor Notes even more than you normally do. This is the voice of the labor movement. These are some of the people who are doing the analysis that we need. This show would not be able to operate and cover the labor movement without publications like Labor Notes. So, keep your eye on them, support them when they have calls for funding and things like that. This is a piece by Keith Brower Brown, who was a guest on this program, called "When Auto Workers Stand Up, Here's How to Stand with Them." There is a link below for people to check out and read this on your own time. But here are some of the things, the most important things for you to be paying attention to. Finding a picket near you. Finding a UAW Big Three workplace near you. And it has a link to a map that shows every 4 General Motors and Stellantis workplace that might go on strike, including assembly plants and part distribution centers. Some of the latter are all over the country, not only in the Midwest. Which ones of these will strike on Friday? The UAW has not announced the targets yet, obviously. So come back to this story to find out where these will be happening. If it starts on Friday, most of these operations are 24-hour operations. So this is something that you can be showing up, even if you might have a job that's not, a 9 to 5 or something like that. People are going to want you to show up. And there's a really important piece of advice here from Keith, which is organize a crew from your workplace and your community. So you're not just showing up alone. You're bringing out other people too. One, that's important because you're bringing more people to the facility. And 2, it makes it easier to keep yourself accountable and to actually show up to these kind of things. Another thing is to reach out to the union and the strikers beforehand. People who are going on strike are, I know sometimes I'm just as much a millennial as a lot of y'all are, that sometimes reaching out cold to people can be a little intimidating. I will say from my personal experience, your fears are unfounded. People love to hear from you. I love to hear from y'all. But in this case, they really want to hear from you. They really want you to show up, not in some kind of weird way like what the World Socialist website people are going to do, where they're going to try to create disunity. People who actually want to show up and do what is asked of them to be able to show support and build out working class power. Organizing a crew, a group of people who are showing up is important. Reaching out to these strikers is going to be really important as well, so that you know when you're needed, what time, what things to bring, all that kind of stuff. Do that level of coordination. This is not like this is important right now, but this is also how, man, you start to build community, how you start to build a movement. This is exactly the opportunity to start doing that. Um, and other piece of advice is get to know strikers, bring food and firewood, and also I like this a lot is adopt a picket line. Solidarity isn't a one-time gig. Once strikers, once the strike gets rolling, get advice from strikers on a specific picket shift that often needs extra hands and supplies. So people in the community and the working class are able to sort of fill in for membership on these kind of things. If you aren't in an area, um, if you aren't in an area where there are going to be pickets around you, you can do things. This is a great time to be on social media, right? Pressure the profiteers, BlackRock, Capital Group, and Vanguard. These people all make a lot of money from these companies that are exploiting workers. And as a last resort call, you can leave a phone message for the big three CEOs by calling 318-300-1249. I'll read that again, 318-300-1249. Leave them a message. Tell them what you think about the way that these companies are treating their workers. Tell them that they want to see the companies show up and end this strike. This is exactly the kind of stuff that you need to be doing. And as we get more information, as we get more strikes happening across the country, Left Reckoning will do as much as we can to try to bolster and bring attention to places and things that are needed. But this is also the work, hopefully this can cascade from us, from the union movement, from other people's in independent media, to be able to go out there and show up and support. Let's see if I can get this map up. All right, so we have this map here. I'm just going to share this really quick. And then if you do have any questions or comments, again, please put at Left Reckoning in there and I'll get to those in a second. We have a couple more clips I want to play too. But these are, if you're seeing this, I don't know how clearly, maybe I can make it a little bit bigger. Sorry if it's not large enough. But you see here, a lot of these are in the Midwest. So folks in Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, certainly Michigan, Kentucky, a lot of responsibilities and ability to show up there. Obviously, Western New York, there's a lot of parts distribution centers across the Northeast. So people in the New York area, in Philly, in Jersey, Maryland, Connecticut. If you're in the South, Greensboro, Charlotte, Atlanta, Nashville, Memphis is a big one. Here in Texas, we got Dallas and Houston that have potential areas that might be going on strike. So keep your eye out for those stories. In the West Coast, we got Los Angeles, San Francisco area. I know this is a little far out, but Portland, close to town. I know we have a lot of listeners in Portland, Vancouver. That's a great place to be showing up for these kind of things. So keep your eye out on the media, keep your eye on these things, and Left Reckoning will certainly do whatever we can to sort of draw people's attention to these strikes. One of the things that is exciting about the stand-up story, strategy, is that what this is going to mean is instead of all of these plants and all these distribution centers going on strike at once, they will be sort of targeted and staggering. A real media advantage to this is that instead of there being one big story at the beginning, workers go on strike and then it might go on for a while, weeks, months. This means that there will always be a new story, right? There will always be more time. And, oh man, people in Kentucky are going on strike. People in Dallas are going on strike. People in Memphis are going on strike, right? There will always be a kind of reminder about what's going on. I'm going to check the chat, see if I missed anything. And then I have another Sean Fain video I have queued up before we get to Jim Cramer. I will just say, not to take the illusion of my beautiful, super decorated studio, it is raining in Austin, Texas, which I feel like is a good sign from somebody looking out for us. We have been in the midst of a pretty brutal drought. So very happy to see that. Yeah, I can put the link in the chat. Let me put the link in the chat as well to this piece by Keith. Okay. No chats as of yet, but let's get to this other piece here because we've been big fans of Sean Fain on this program. I love the way that he communicates. He's able to put forward some of these radical messages, but also root them in his own way, right? Like as a reflection of himself. He's going to talk here a little bit to the workers, his commitment to this strike. And he's going to quote one of my favorite pieces of scripture here, one that I think should get a lot more play than it does. So let's play that for a minute and then we'll be right back.
Nobody's coming to save us. Nobody can win this fight for us. Our greatest hope and our only hope is with each other, standing together. And I tell you this, I'm at peace with the decision to strike if we have to, because I know that we're on the right side in this battle. It's a battle of the working class against the rich, the haves versus the have-nots, the billionaire class against everybody else. And again, in talking about that, this class warfare, people accuse us and say this is class warfare. There's been class warfare going on in this country for the last 40 years. The billionaire class has been taking everything and leaving everybody else to fight for the scraps. And when I talk about that, there's one more piece of scripture I like, it reminds me of in Matthew 19, 23, 24, which states, "It is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God."
Hell yeah.
Why is it easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich person to enter the kingdom of God? I have to believe that answer, at least in part, is because in the kingdom of God, no one hoards all the wealth while everybody else suffers and starves. In the kingdom of God, no one puts themselves in a position of total domination over the entire community. In the kingdom of God, no one forces others to perform endless, back-breaking work just to feed their families or put a roof over their heads. That world's not the kingdom of God. That world is hell. Living paycheck to paycheck, scraping to get by, that's hell. Choosing between medicine and rent is hell. Working 7 days a week for 12 hours a day for months on end is hell. Having your plant closed down and your family scattered across the country is hell. Being made to work during a pandemic and not knowing if you might get sick and die or spread the disease to your family is hell. And enough is enough. It's time to decide what kind of world we want to live in. And it's time to decide what we're willing to do to get it.
I mean, that's right. That's exactly right. I love the reference. I mean, that is obviously one of the more radical pieces of scripture there. And I think it's really important to talk about hell on earth, right? We would love to aspire for heaven on earth, those kind of things, but helping people realize that the things that are being done to us is a hell, but it is not a hell that is coming from up high. It is a hell that is created by man. It is a hell that is created by bosses. It is a hell that is created by the class warfare that we have been experiencing from the top. that is exactly the right message to be sharing with folks. I've been spending a lot of my time recently looking back at the early socialist movement, the Socialist Party in this country. And, one thing that a lot of these early socialists, particularly the people around Debs, were very well versed in, were really able to do, was to be able to speak, to some of the religious traditions. And look, you don't have to be a religious person to be able to understand how clear that message is. For example, about a camel being able to go through an arduous task, like going through the eye of a needle, versus a rich person being able to get into heaven. This is a system that morally taints people. And it's actually something, again, like, and I'm not even a religious person myself. I know about it. I've been around it most of my life. But these are true messages, right? Being able to speak about the hell that is created by us as human beings. That's an important reference point for people. And also for people to understand that capitalism not only, and the focus is always going to be on working people, not only degrades workers, it also degrades the rich. It denies them of their humanity, because just as much of life, of being a human being, is being able to have empathy with other people. Is, that moment when you see somebody and, they need help out in public, and, it's just something that's just innate inside of you. That is a part of being a human being. That is a fundamental part of being human. It is just undeniable. It's why we are a social being, right? It is why human beings are social creatures, right? As much as capitalism tries to turn us against each other, make us individualistic, we have this innate community built inside of us, right? This mind of community, this looking out for your neighbor, looking out for each other. Capitalism is, despite all of the arguments that you get from the rich and the propagandists and all these people who say, capitalism is just a natural system, right? It's just an expansion, and it's extension. It's a natural thing. It is not. It is unnatural to see somebody suffering and to not only not help them, but to make them suffer more for your own personal gain. That is unnatural. That is debasing of your human spirit, your ability to be a full functional human being. Being able to put these things in those kind of terms, I think, is not something that we should shy away from. That is something that we should embrace, because this is a system that makes people do evil things to each other. And the promise of a labor movement, the promise of workers' democracy, the promise of working class power is flipping the system that we live under into one that is more in line with humanity, to those human impulses. And I think that's a great message to be sharing. Feeling all nice. I feel a little bad about getting mad, but we might have to for a second. And then I'm going to open up to questions for y'all for a little bit. And we'll certainly be covering this. I mean, I hope everybody's watching later tonight, 10 Eastern, 9 Central. You should definitely be watching the UAW's announcement, where I think it's very likely that they're going to be calling for a strike. Let's play somebody who has everyone loves pointing this out. I think it's worth pointing out. We want to talk about how capitalism debases you. And Cramer loves noting the fact that he used to be a working class guy, used to be a labor dude, used to be a socialist. He's a part of the Spartacus League. And now he talks and defends rich people for a living. That's called debasing yourself. Well, let's check in on Cramer, because as I said at the beginning, I do think we should have the Cramer Index. The more angry that Jim Cramer is, the better and the stronger the working class movement is in this country. And man, the forecast is good for us.
We are preparing to strike these companies in a way they've never seen before.
Oh, Jim, you said Ford does have the best offer. I think a 20.
Well, I'm going to posit something. The man you saw just now, I think, is a paper tiger. He's coming in and saying, well, they've never seen anything like it. I think there's a nuclear option on the table if he's not careful. And that nuclear option is a country called Mexico. You don't hear about it much. But if you say we're intransigent and we're going to stay at 40%. There's no give. Well, you know what? Monterrey, Puebla,
And
Querétaro.
There's the capacity to have that happen, not overnight.
Mercedes-
Sort of trying to
Mercedes
flex
did it in
his
2 years.
knowledge of Mexican
2
geography.
years would be a long time to.
Why? They don't have that much demand. You put that out there and you say, listen, you want to know where the new ones are going to be made? We're going to continue to make the old ones. But Puebla's got a 55,000 person factory for VW, and they got a good educational workforce. It's $5 an hour, no real pollution control rules. That's not to be mentioned. Have free health care. So you know what? You want to play ball? You want to keep doing this? Mexico.
Glad to see you're standing up for the American worker here, Jim. Thanks for that.
Well, no, I was a union member twice. One was completely corrupt when I led a wildcat strike and was fired.
Oh, okay.
That was not good.
But in this case, you seem to believe that the automakers have
well, I just think that
the
this
upper
man,
hand.
And I like, the union, you could say that they're way behind, the wages aren't the same as
well,
how
his
well.
point would be that they have barely kept up. They haven't kept up with even the
But
pace of inflation
20%.
since
So you go to
2007.
25. Are they not? Is he not satisfied with 25% increase? I think most of America is. Ford's the most unionized company in America. It is.
What about the way that they say they're going to strike, which would be not across the board,
Well,
but specific?
Stellantis is the one that you want to go up. Oh, you mean targeted factories?
Yes, targeted
So
factories.
you target the F-150 because it makes a lot of money, the F-150 hybrid. They can build a hybrid very easily in Monterrey.
B of A took a crack at that, what they're calling a standing strike, where you go after individual facilities.
Jim Cramer, they're talking like a super drunk gringo on vacation. Oh, they can build it in Monterrey. Nasty guy. And he's pissed. And I think that's a damn good thing. Those are the guys who I want to see being mad right now. These companies are refusing very reasonable demands from the union movement. They've been told time and time again, this doesn't fall from the moon, right? And everybody here listening to this knows that, right? These have been ongoing negotiation process. The demands have been made very clear. I mean, the union sent their demands into the pig 3 months ago. And, now they're sitting here and be like, oh my God, they just dropped all of this stuff on us. No, these companies are making more money than ever. The Ford CEO just got paid, $21 million. And they're sitting here crying and screaming about cost of living adjustments, the end to 2-tier contract work. It's bullshit. Everyone can see through it. The reason they are willing to hold out is because they are afraid of what a good example will mean for them and for everybody else who benefits from the exploitation of working people. What Jim Cramer is doing right there is a less extreme version of what that Australian fella was doing earlier this week, the video that we've played. I'm sure everyone's seen it on social media or on this program, where he was saying that it's time for the people in power and government to make the economy suffer so that working people become more subservient. Jim Cramer's making the same argument here, albeit a little bit more muted, right? Because what he's saying is we should rip out industry out of the United States of America and send it to Mexico. I have some bad news for Jim Cramer here, because one of the best things, one of the big promises of the working class movement is that unlike these freaks, the working class movement is international. There are more working people across the globe and in this country than there are rich folks. And we're already seeing these seeds being planted of building a stronger international labor movement. This is from an incredible Labor Notes reporter, Luis Feliz Leon, who tweeted this out the other day. Mexican auto workers tell their coworkers to stand in solidarity with U.S. auto workers and reject speed up, because in the event of a strike against the big three, the companies are going to try to increase line speeds in factories across Mexico to move production. Solidarity. So Jim Cramer can talk big about moving all these things to Mexico. The problem is that they will never be able to get away from workers, because that is the fundamental point about this injustice and this inequity. And it's something that we have to realize as a class. We have the power. They may take the stuff from us because of years of class warfare from the top, years of control of the government by the lackeys of the ruling class, of the rich and the powerful. But we hold the keys to this car. And that is our labor. seeing these kind of things is really incredible. Now, to be able to do that on a mass scale is going to take a lot of coordination. Let's not be starry-eyed about these things, not be starry-eyed and worried, not to be, we have to be worried about the threats of a Cramer or these big three saying that they're going to uproot production. The reality is they can't do that in any kind of real time. They cannot move these supply chains down to Mexico in any kind of time. It is an idle threat. Jim Cramer wants to talk about Sean Fain being a paper tiger. Fucking Jim Cramer's career is set up on being a paper tiger and a liar at that. Somebody who is wrong every fucking week when he goes onto that program. The fact is that the way to beat these people is to build class solidarity in this country and all across the world. That's something that we're seeing happen in the UAW right now in the United States. And hopefully we're starting to do that kind of expansion work so that we can have a global, international working class movement that can say to all these companies, we're on the same side. It's aspirational. We have to build it. It's not here right now. I'm not going to blow smoke up people's asses and say it is here. But man, when you start to feel your power, like all of these people who are about to go on strike are about to start feeling their power, start to see the boss sweat, that stuff can be infectious. And those are the kind of things that we have to be supporting. So I'm very happy to see Jim Cramer mad. Every week, people send me these videos of Jim Cramer freaking out, and it makes me so damn happy. And I want to see a hell of a lot more of it. We got, we're going to be covering this. We got a lot more, to be coming. Pay attention this evening. Certainly be paying attention tomorrow. Keep tuning into Left Reckoning. Find ways to support this movement. I have about 15 minutes or so where I would be happy to take some questions if people have them. If they don't, we can move on. I have some other things about the labor movement that I can talk about. I have some lessons from this great book that people should pick up if they haven't already. Mean Things Happening in This Land. It is the autobiography of H.L. Mitchell, who is one of the co-founders of the Southern Tenant Farmers Union. One of the most incredible books I've read in a long time. Not only is it a chronicle of a history of a really important labor union that a lot of people don't know enough about, but Michael Harrington, who people might know of, when the founders of the Democratic Socialists of America wrote the preface to this book. And I'll just read it really quick, and people can please put some questions in the chat. I'll respond to them, put at Left Reckoning. I'm happy to talk about other things than the union stuff, but man, I don't know how you can be thinking about much else than the working class movement right now. Let me just read the last section of this, and I could talk about it a little bit, and then I'll go to questions. I'll just read the end. He has this really incredible opening. So, for people who don't know, the Southern Tenant Farmers Union, one of the first interracial unions in the country, one of the most influential ones, and it was also a union of the people at the bottom of the economic heap. We're talking about tenant farmers and sharecroppers, people who are living in the vestiges, right? The old system of the plantation economy, which they just sort of retrofitted to work after slavery had ended. People were indebted. They weren't able to leave the plantations. They didn't have a lot of options, and they were exploited because of it. Instead of waiting for help to come from up high, in fact, the FDR administration and Henry Wallace, who was the Secretary of Agriculture at the time, made it worse for a lot of these workers by putting forward the Agricultural Adjustment Act, which ordered most of these operations to limit their to burn and tear up 1/3 of their crop production, leading to nearly 1 million sharecroppers being thrown on the side of the road. There were promises that money was supposed to go to these tenant farmers and sharecroppers, but you send the money to the landlords. Why do you think the money's going to go to the workers? It's not. A lot of the Southern Tenant Farmers Union's early work was trying to get the FDR administration, and particularly Henry Wallace, to listen to their concerns. Henry Wallace is somebody who has gotten a lot of shine recently, right? A lot of wild narratives about Henry Wallace's, this potential of American socialism, even, if not what most people focus on is maybe sort of not being as enthused by war and building a Cold War against the Soviet Union. You read this book, man, and you will not have a very high opinion of Henry Wallace and the people that he brought into power. the Southern Tenant Farmers Union was one of the most incredible American stories. And the Michael Harrington preface is really great because he says, a lot of people might read this book as like a kind of a history, a transitory period between the old South and the new South, right? The South of the Sun Belt, the South of Memphis and Atlanta and Nashville, right? And, by extension, Austin and places like that, right? Where all of this economic activity starts changing those societies in the 70s and 80s, right? And he says, no, it's certainly a period of transition. But what actually the Southern Tenant Farmers Union represents and what this book and this history, and I'll just put it up again, mean things happening in this land, um, shows you is not just the story of transition, um, but rather by looking at the past, looking at a different future for this country, looking at a different future for the South, certainly, but a different future for the United States of America, where poor whites and poor blacks were able to get together and organize together, not in some kind of stupid way, like some of these folks argue now, which is like, oh, we'll just ignore racism. No, by taking on racism, but recognizing that racism and these systems are so prevalent and so powerful in the society because they benefit the rich and the powerful. So no, not just the transition between the old South and the new South, but actually a map, a germ, right? In terms of like germinating a seed, right? A seed of a different world and a different future for this country. But I just love this line here, and I'll just read it. I have more thoughts on the Southern Tenant Farmers Union, but I want to make sure I'm not missing y'all. If you have any questions or comments in there, what I find so powerful in this book is the testimony to the grandeur of ordinary people. In those moments, all too rare up until now, in which they are their best selves. Reading this book is like having a conversation with history, not the history of presidents and princes, but the history of those who do the dying and the living. We are enormously in H.L. Mitchell's debt. And we opened up the show with a song by John Hancock's, and these are people who seriously need to be remembered. I have a piece coming out hopefully soon in Jacobin on them, but people should pick up this book because there's a lot of stories of incredible heroism. I mean, these guys were not just taking on the bosses; they were taking on the KKK, they were taking on the government, they're taking on the legal system. The odds were stacked against them. So there is a heroism there. I mean, there's gallant, right? It's incredible. Small towns, rural people getting together, arming themselves and shooting off the KKK and the Night Riders, going up to Washington D.C. and demanding to have a seat at the table when Henry Wallace and all those so-called progressives were really willing to sort of throw millions of Southern workers, to the altar of the free market, right? Incredible heroism. But these were just normal people. They were normal people. And the reason this book is so inspiring to me, and I hope would be inspiring to you, is that it's that kind of realization that there's just tremendous latent power in the working class. We have our heroes. There are people who will rise up to the moment. They should be remembered and they should be praised, right? And they should be looked up to, but never in a way where we don't recognize that they are people just like us. The difference is they had the courage to see the situation around them and the courage to stand up and fight back. Um, so, I mean, I could talk more about the Southern Tenant Farmers Union, but I want to make sure I'm not missing any questions. So, if you have any ones, I will look through those really fast, and maybe if not, I'll talk a little bit more about the STFU. Jim Cramer did say Merca. I don't know what the hell's going on uh, with the way he's talking in that clip. Thank you so much to our good friend from Australia who says UAW with Fain are fantastic examples of the working class around the world, much as the metaphysical spirit. Man, feeling good. Why you ruin it with these nasty, nasty things like Texas A&M? Much as the metaphysical spirit of our Aggies inspired Texas, gig 'em. I appreciate you very much, friend, but I think you should start saying hook 'em very soon. All right. Yes, Wallace was really bad, really bad. I mean, literally at one point, they fired a bunch of people in the administration and the Department of Agriculture because they were because they were advocating for the tenant farmers. There were reports that were compiled by members of the Department of Agriculture to say how the AAA, the Agricultural Adjustment Act, wasn't working for tenant farmers, and they fired them instead of listening to folks. It was because of H.L. Mitchell. It was because of people like E.B. McKinney, who was a black member of the STFU and one of its vice presidents, who made such a stink about it, who showed up and they started putting pressure on the administration that they started to move. Right. Wallace met with them and he was, oh, I'm hearing you. And then went on to fire a bunch of people who were advocating for the sharecroppers. Very famously, one of the um, an important figure within the Department of Agriculture, when being asked why every other interest in the agricultural industry was being heard, except for the sharecroppers and tenant farmers, said, well, would you suggest that we start putting chickens on the poultry board? Right? Saying that, these people are being brought to the slaughter. Why are you advocating for them? No, they were not good. It was because of H.L. Mitchell. It was because of progressives and socialists around the FDR administration who started putting more and more pressure on it that you ended up seeing some kind of change. And Eleanor Roosevelt, FDR's wife, was somebody who advocated a lot for these people, and did so very well. Despite the kicking and screaming of people like Wallace. Lorada says, why don't DSA, PSL, CPUSA run candidates anymore? Wouldn't they be well situated right now to stand behind workers and make this from exclusively a labor fight into a political fight? Well, I mean, DSA runs candidates all across the country. PSL just announced two new presidential candidates. The Communist Party of the United States of America does run some candidates. I know some people ran in California and in places here and there. But they have, it's funny that which ones you'd sort of put on like a list of like the most radical. The Communist Party actually has a very wild internal take on what to do in a moment like this, and they basically think that you have to support the Democratic Party until they can defeat the Republican Party, and then the ground will be ready for more socialist movements. So it's happening. So so it is. The problem is that our benches are pretty low. I think that it's important to remember, like DSA has elected. People focus a lot on the squad, but I think there's something like 400 elected officials all across the country who are DSA affiliated members of varying degrees. I mean, New York in particular has a pretty strong bench of people who are in the state legislature there, who are much more rooted than, like, let's say the squad members are in the organization. Um, in San Antonio, we have DSA members on the city council. So that's happening. Jay says, Dave, you should write a book, my brother. I know for a fact you'd kill it. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. I love writing, but it's hard. This is a good question. It's one that I'd have to really think about to give you specific topics, but I think the best thing you could do if you were to be creating a reading list for everyday people is to not shy away from people's innate intelligence, and be will. I mean, to think about. I mean, like, honestly, I think like the text that we have done in our Marx reading series, from Marx to Lenin and things like that to Rosa Luxemburg, would all be great places to start. But I think that if you were to design like a syllabus for like a socialist movement or a socialist org, you should think about two things like classic central texts, but also ones that maybe speak directly to an issue, right? So something on landlordism or on the working day, things like that, so that you're sort of mixing and matching things that are sort of maybe more broad, fundamental text with things that are maybe more condensed and focused on a single issue. So you're getting a little bit of both, right? Because like learning and understanding the world in a more um, theoretical way, it takes a while to for all those things to start to click. But if you start talking about particular issues, you can get a lot of ground there. So like it's one of those things. So like you give people things that are quick and like approachable and specific, so that you get that feeling of accomplishment, while also building that base that after a 6-week course or something like that, things really start to click. There we go. Hook 'em. I appreciate it very much, friend. So let me just say one thing. Oh yeah, how could I forget? Thanks, Sean, for the reminder. We have DSA member Jose Garza as a Travis County District Attorney too. Um, I want to do more on this in the future, but there was something that I had wanted to talk about earlier in the week. Wasn't able to get into the main show, and obviously we want to talk about the UAW today. Um, and it's how we think about politics in the labor movement, because I'm seeing some really conservative things coming out of progressives in particular, but also a lot of socialists who are making these kind of arguments. I will also just say, as a side note, and as a little bit of a selfish one, this is a little bit of a time for a litmus test. Let's see how people are paying attention, how much attention people are paying to this strike versus endless fights about whether or not people should vote for Biden or support Cornel West or whatever. We'll put more videos out about it. Certainly, I know we'll probably release some of the stuff from the from the post game this week as well. So I'm not saying talking about that is bad in and of itself. But there's a whole cottage industry in the independent media scene right now that can only talk about two things: hot social media videos. Some guy says something stupid, you debunk them, make fun of them, or whether or not the Democratic Party represents the biggest threat to workers. I'm not even getting into it right now. I just I've done enough on it. I don't have time. Um, but this is a moment where I think some things have become really clear with some of those other platforms out there that seem to have a lot of energy for that, and not a lot of energy for the labor movement. But getting back to what I was saying, and this is I'm going to end on this, folks, is that going back to these folks, the Southern Tenant Farmers Union, the history of the labor movement in this country, and what these folks in the UAW are going to be up against right now. There is no sense in denying the fact that there are certain legal conditions for union organizing that are better than others. You'd have to be, up your own ass to say that that's not the case. But it is a extremely conservative position to take, and I'm seeing, unfortunately, a lot of people who I do consider friends, and I'm not even trying to come at them. I'm just trying to correct people on this point. Make these kind of arguments about conditions in the legal sense, right? What is the makeup of the NLRB? What is the makeup of labor law in this country? And then make, which is a fine enough conversation to have, right? The NLRB, Lord help us all, is unable to respond to the very clear law breaking of corporations all across this country. And even when they are able to make a ruling, I mean, what are they able to do effectively? It's been very little, right? I want to see that power expanded. I think that would be good for a working class movement. So I'm not saying that it's meaningless, but I have seen people make arguments, for example, that this labor upsurge that we are seeing right now starts in Washington, D.C. And man, that is a conservative and an incorrect argument, my friends. That is an incorrect argument. It is very helpful when you have certain legal systems that are more amenable to workers versus others, right? Thinking about something like what the railroad workers experienced when Joe Biden broke a strike with the help of the vast majority of the Democratic Party, including members of the squad. No doubt about it. That's a hurdle. But it was tough as hell in the 30s. You don't even have to be so American centric. All across the world, people have struck and fought and broke the law, right? In order to fight for a better world for working people. And people and unions and workers do not need to be sort of constrained by the political conditions of the time that they are organizing in. If you want to make an argument about things that you think are better politically, I'm here for that argument. But what I'm seeing right now, and I think it is extremely conservative, and frankly, it's insulting to all of these people in the labor movement right now who are getting more militant, to all of these movements within established labor unions. Like, we're not even just talking about like Starbucks and Amazon, right? Established labor unions like the UAW, like the Teamsters, which have worked internally to democratize those unions. And that's why you're starting to see more militancy from them. Like to see more. It's an insult to them to start to say, oh, well, Biden's NLRB is sort of allowing and helping and like building. These things are a reaction to Joe Biden policies. That is, one, I think, factually wrong. If you look at the conditions of labor organizing in this country historically, but even if you just take a short view, look how was the NLRB there for the workers who went on strike in Alabama and ended up being defeated, right? The NLRB was nowhere to be seen. And again, even like think about Bessemer, Alabama, right? An event that a lot of people paid attention to, the Amazon Union Drive in Bessemer, Alabama. Amazon broke the law. The NLRB got involved later and said, yeah, Amazon broke the law. But Amazon won. Why? Because Amazon is a company with tremendous amounts of power. And by the time the NLRB is able to act, it's much too late. A firmer NLRB would be great. But what is always going to be needed and who is always going to be leading that is going to be working people. And we have to be able to fight and win in any condition. And people who start making arguments about union and labor politics, starting in Washington and then coming out to the masses, are wrong. It's wrong historically, it's wrong today, and it's wrong for the future of what we want to see in this movement. So, I just want to push back against this idea because we're seeing, unfortunately, too much of it. And it's an extremely conservative idea because instead of putting working people, the labor movement at the center of the struggle, it's putting the politics and the theater and the actions of Washington, D.C. and politicians over the labor movement. And if you are somebody who considers yourself to be an ally of labor, you're somebody who wants to not just see maybe a return to the labor unions of the 60s, but rather a more expansive, a more radical, a more tough union movement. You need to be advocating for much, much more. And you certainly should not be undermining the accomplishments of labor in the past few years by saying they start with the Biden administration, the NLRB. That's a conservative argument. On that, friends, I think I'm going to run. I appreciate you all. Please watch later tonight the UAW's announcement, 10 Eastern, 9 Central. Read the article that is in the show notes about how to help out the UAW strike. We will certainly be tuned in, trying to cover that as much as possible. This is one of the most important labor struggles of our lifetime. This is a time, if you are somebody who says, I want stronger unions, I want a stronger labor movement, this is the time to be getting involved. Folks, I will see you soon. Hope that you have a good weekend, and we'll be back this Sunday with a bonus episode for patrons, patreon.com/leftreckoning. Take care, everybody, and see you soon.